This is Mechanics 30 brake inspection checklist, and I'm going to go through the checklist and just give you some pointers on what it all needs to look like. So let's start at the top. We're obviously going to fill in all of the customer information, the customer, make, model, mileage. If it's a shop vehicle, you won't be using the plate number, but you can write down the VIN number, year, and you can write your number in where it says tech. Road test evaluation. If this is a shop car, you won't be able to road test it, but if it is your vehicle, it'd be a good idea to take it for a little drive before you come to class and just think about all of these things. And really, it's important that you understand and feel and listen and observe what's going on with your brakes, so that if you do any work on it later, it will show up and you'll be able to notice that, yeah, that was different, or that, no, that's the same. So initial inspection right here, it's talking about how the brake holds, brake fluid levels. So you're just going to go through and just have a look at all of the different things from that initial inspection before you can lift it up and do all of that stuff. That will happen in the undercar inspection. So we're looking for brake fluid leaks, brake lines. Just have a look at all of these things. And if you have any extra comments, this is the place to put it. Very often the comments section is not big enough, and in that case you would write down recommendations on the work order for the vehicle that you're working on. So now we're going to come down and look at your component inspection. This is just an example of a form that you probably would get if you were in a shop and they had their standard forms that you had to fill in. And so not all of them have room to write down everything. And so you're going to take the time to fill in what is not here also. But let's look at what is here right now. So we've got the component inspection, and that's all of these things, all the way down to there. And we're going to look at a bunch of the components. These measurements right here have to do with the front brake pad stuff, and these measurements have to do with the rear brakes, or if it's a drum brake, that's what it would be. So we have front brake pads in this case, and pass or fail, needs soon. So you have those three options. It's a good idea to write down your observations. And so what I would do is, in these spots here, I would write down sort of right hand, and maybe a left hand here, so that you have everything written down. And then you can check off the box whether it's fail or pass or whatever. And then over here you can write down, check certain things. You may have noticed when we watched the other videos about doing the measurements that sometimes we have inner pads wearing out quicker than outer pads. Well, that means something. And that's where this right front caliper comes in, and left front caliper. Pass or fail. If we have uneven wear of the brake pads, that's where we're going to encounter where we have to do something with the caliper. Now, that might not be the caliper itself. That might be the slide pins in the caliper, different things like that. And so you definitely want to make a note of it over here so that we can have a talk about it later. Anytime that we are measuring anything, we need to write down the measurements somewhere. I don't care where it is, whether it's on the work order or right on this sheet. It needs to be written down somewhere so that we can have that for future reference if that's something that is necessary. Good. So you're going to write all that stuff. Use all this space in here because you'll need it. Front brake hoses, any kind of crack whatsoever, whether it's the outer part of the rubber on the outside or anything, they need to be replaced, recommended to be replaced. So you'll always, I don't know why it says worn here, but cracked is what we're looking for. Left front rotor, right front rotor. We had to do some measurements on there. We have to check for parallelism and the general thickness, and we also have to check for warpage. And so all of that stuff, you can write down, you can see pass, it's either good or it's scored, or other damage. The other damage is where we would write these things in. So how much warpage? So you'll just write down warpage and then look at that. So we have some measurements down here. left front rotor, right front rotor, there's obviously not enough room right in there to put all of that information. And so probably what I would write in here is the smallest thickness of the linings. So you're always going to go by the thinnest part of the lining, because that's the part that's going to, of the pad that's going to make contact with the rotor first. So you're going to write that in there. Probably what I would do is just general, put the thickness of the left-hand rotor and the thickness of the right-hand rotor in these areas here, and then put the other rotor information over on this side, like I said before. Good. Now let's look at the rear brakes. So you can see, let's look at the measurements part here. Again, it's going to follow the same principles as we had up here when we were talking about the rotors and disc brakes, and just putting that information in there like that. Very often, if this is a rear-wheel drive, you have axles that could leak from the rear differential into the brake area. A lot of them, like on a front-wheel drive car, you're not going to have that case, but you definitely want to look at that if you need to. Rear axle hose, rear brake hoses. So you have a bunch of hoses and lines. You want to follow that from the front right to the very back. Right rear rotor and drum. So we could have rear disc brakes too. If that's the case, you can see that it says rotor or drum here in both of those cases. So rear pads or shoes, pass or fail, caliper. So if you're looking at drum brakes, if it's a wheel cylinder back, you're going to look for leaks, or maybe one side is applying and the other is not, and that's what we want to look for. One thing that we don't have here really has to do with other hardware. You're going to look at the springs, you're going to look at the levers, make sure everything is moving around properly, and if it's not, just sort of grab it with both sides of your hands and see if you can wiggle all of the brake shoes back and forth. They should slide back and forth. You want to look at the backing plate, make sure nothing's wearing out there, and make sure there's a little bit of lube to enable your shoes to move back and forth. If you have problems with the emergency brake, back when you were checking on your parking brake holes or not, then you need to check that out to make sure everything is working properly. One thing I want to make you aware of about the parking brake is that if it's an automatic vehicle, then the parking brake is not used very much. And you could encounter the case where you pull the emergency brake and you have a big problem, and that problem is it hasn't been used at all and it's all rusted inside and it's seized up, and now the brakes are seized on. So you got to be careful with that. Look at the condition of the vehicle, where it might have been, and before you just go pulling the emergency brake, before you have a look at it. ABS components is the last part here, and we just want an anti-lock brake system. We have some, you're just looking for wires that are broken or sensors that have oil on them or stuff like that that you just need to make sure we clean up. If there is a light on for ABS, then you want to check that stuff out. But really, this is just for the mechanical part of the brake system that we're looking.